Seattle, in the autumn of 1952, was a city trying to forget the war and failing. The rain wasn't just weather, it was a mood, a perpetual gray shroud that seeped into the brick and the bones. In the shadow of the new Alaskan Way Viaduct, where the salty breath of Elliott Bay clashed with the smell of wet asphalt and factory smoke, lay Lantern Street, a narrow, cobbled gulch of warehouses, printing shops, and the kind of bars that opened at 8 a.m. It was a street the post-war boom had passed by, a place of shadows and short memories. It was here, on the night of October 17th, that Rosemary Finch vanished. She was 23, a secretary at Corbett & Sons Shipping, a firm that occupied the third floor of a soot-stained brick building halfway down the street. She was pretty in a quiet way, reliable, lived with her mother in Rainier Valley, took the streetcar, the kind of girl who was a ghost until she wasn't there, and then her absence was a deafening silence. Her mother reported her missing the next morning when she didn't come home. Patrolmen found the scene on Lantern Street just after dawn. The rain had washed the world clean, but it had left a few artifacts behind. A single pump-style woman's shoe, navy blue with a modest heel, lay on its side in the gutter where the cobbles met the asphalt. It was soaked, forlorn. A few yards away, outside the shuttered door of a novelty import shop, lay Rosemary's handbag. Its contents were spilled, as if dropped. A compact, a tube of lipstick, a bus pass, a half-eaten roll of lifesavers. And caught under the bag's clasp, not inside, but as if placed or blown there, was a note. Not paper, a telegraph slip, the kind used for urgent messages. It bore no addressee, no sender, just 3 words typed in all caps on the heavy yellow paper. Don't look up. That was it. A shoe, a spilled purse, a cryptic typed warning. No sign of a struggle beyond the dropped belongings. No blood. Just the relentless drizzle and the echo of a girl's footsteps that had suddenly stopped. The detective assigned to the case was Jonas Rook, a man who came to Seattle after the war with a limp, a foggy memory of Iwo Jima, and a talent for seeing the shapes in the gray. He stood on Lantern Street, the collar of his trench coat turned up against the damp, and felt the familiar cold trickle of a story that didn't want to be told. The lack of cameras was a given. Lantern Street was a blind spot. The witnesses, such as they were creatures of the gray hour between night and day. Mickey, the night watchman who patrolled the warehouse district, claimed he saw Rosemary leave the Corbett building at 5:45 p.m., right on time. He saw her walk toward the streetcar stop on First Avenue. He didn't see anything else. Just the girl, the rain, and the fog rolling in off the bay, he said, his eyes roomy and distant. Sally, from the Blue Parrot Diner 2 blocks over, swore she saw a fancy car, a dark sedan, maybe a DeSoto or a Packard, idling at the mouth of Lantern Street around that time. A man in a hat behind the wheel. She didn't see the girl get in. She just saw the car, then it was gone. Old man Henderson, who lived above the import shop and was mostly deaf, said he heard a sharp sound like a backfire or a shout around 6 p.m. He looked out his window, but saw only the fog, thicker than usual, swirling like it was alive. 3 stories, none matching, a car that may or may not be relevant, a sound that could be anything, a note that warned against the most human of impulses, to look up. Rook had the girl's shoe bagged. He examined a telegraph slip. The typing was clean, professional. The paper was dry, while everything else was soaked. It had been placed there after the rain began, or kept dry somehow. This wasn't a note dropped in a struggle. It was a message left behind. He went to Corbett & Sons. The office was a tomb of filing cabinets and the clatter of a single Remington typewriter. The boss, Gerald Corbett, was a florid man in his 50s, all bluster and cigar smoke. He was shocked about Rosemary. A good girl, quiet, did her work. No, she had no troubles he knew of, no boyfriends who came to the office, no strange calls. Rook asked to see her desk. It was painfully neat. A calendar with circles around paydays, a photo of her and her mother at the Puyallup Hair.
In her desk drawer, tucked inside a shorthand manual, he found a single matchbook. It was from a place called the Aviary, a jazz club, he knew, down in the colored district of Jackson Street. Not the kind of place a quiet secretary from Rainier Valley would frequent. Or would she? He interviewed her co-workers, 2 other secretaries and a nervous bookkeeper. They were scared, whispering. They confirmed she was quiet, kept to herself, but the younger secretary, Betty, with tears in her eyes, leaned in when the bookkeeper was out of earshot. She was different lately, nervous, jumpy. Last week she got a phone call. She went white as a sheet. She said, "I can't, not again." Then she just hung up. She wouldn't say who it was. A phone call, a matchbook from a jazz club, a note saying, "Don't look up." Rook left the office, the matchbook a secret weight in his pocket. He stood again on Lantern Street, looking at the spot where the shoe lay. He looked down the gulch of the street, toward the bay where the fog was already gathering for the evening performance. Then, slowly, against the explicit warning of the note, he looked up. The buildings were 4, 5 stories tall, their upper windows mostly dark, some boarded up. Fire escapes formed a rusty iron lattice against the brick. And near the top of the Corbett building, on the 5th floor, a floor that according to the directory in the lobby was vacant, a single window was open, just a crack, a dark eye-like slit in the gray face of the city. Don't look up. Someone didn't want attention drawn to the heights. Someone, perhaps, who had been watching from above. Rosemary Finch hadn't vanished into the fog. She had been plucked from the street, or she had gone upwards, towards that open window. And the only thing left behind was a shoe, a purse, and a note meant for whoever came asking, for him. The game was already in motion, and the first move was a typed command left in the rain, telling him to ignore the obvious place. Jonas Rook, a man who'd learned in a different jungle to always check the high ground, knew he would have to look up, and he knew with a detective's cold certainty that whatever was up there was waiting for him. A secretary vanishes into the Seattle fog, leaving behind only a shoe, a spilled purse, and a typed note warning, "Don't look up." For Detective Jonas Rook, a man haunted by his own shadows, the case is a trap from the first step. The witnesses contradict, the street has no eyes, and the only clue was a matchbook from a jazz club and an open window high above the scene. To follow Rook as he defies the warning and looks up into the rain-slicked heights of Lantern Street, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The first clue is a command to ignore all others.
The lobby at the Corbett building was a study in neglect. Faded linoleum, a smell of damp and boiler heat, a wall of brass mail slots, half of them nameless. The elevator was an ornate gated cage that looked like it hadn't worked since Hoover. Rook took the stairs. The first 3 floors were occupied, a defunct tool and die company, a sweatshop for sewing raincoats, Corbett and Sons. The 4th floor was silent, a dusty glass door revealing empty offices with calendars frozen on dates from 1948. The air grew colder, dustier. The stairs ended at the 5th floor. There was no door, just an open archway leading into a vast, dark loft space. The only light came from the open window he'd seen from the street, a rectangle of damp gray twilight that fell across a floor littered with debris, broken furniture, piles of crumbling plaster, coils of wire. The fog had crept inside, giving the air a granular, spectral quality. Rook moved slowly, his hand on the butt of his service revolver. His footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. He made for the open window. It looked down onto the Lantern Street, a perfect bird's-eye view of the spot where Rosemary's shoe had lain, a sniper's perch, or a watch's nest. Near the window, he found signs of recent habitation, not a nest, but a camp. An army surplus bedroll laid out neatly, a tin cup and a sterno can for heating coffee, a stack of pulp detective magazines, and a small portable typewriter, an Underwood noiseless model from the late 30s. He lifted the cover. The typeface was clean, professional. He didn't need to check. He knew it would match the note.
"Don't look up" had been typed here, on this machine, by someone watching the street below. This was no random predator. This was a stakeout. Someone had been living here, watching Rosemary Finch, waiting. For what? He searched the bedroll. In a side pocket, he found a sheaf of papers. Not more notes, photographs. Dozens of them, all of Rosemary Finch. Candid shots taken with a telephoto lens, leaving her house, waiting for the streetcar, walking into the Corbett building, sitting at her desk, visible through the office window. The photos were methodical, chronological, spanning at least 2 weeks. A surveillance log. The last photo in the stack was different. It showed Rosemary not alone, but with a man. They were standing under the marquee of the Aviary Jazz Club. The man was tall, well-dressed in a zoot suit, his face turned partly away, but his profile was sharp, handsome. He was clearly not from Lanton Street. He was holding her arm, not roughly, but possessively. Rosemary's expression was hard to read, not scared, but intense, serious. The matchbook in her desk had a provenance. She knew this man, and the watcher in the loft knew them both. Rook pocketed the photos. He examined the typewriter more closely. Tucked under the platen was a half-typed sheet of paper. It was the beginning of a letter or a report. It read, "Subject maintains contact with asset. Meeting scheduled for the 17th. If exchange occurs, the whole operation is compromised. Authorization for termination is advised. Signal will be—" The sentence stopped mid-word. The 17th. Today. The night she vanished. Termination. The word hung in the cold air like a promise. This wasn't a stalker. This was espionage, or something that smelled just like it. Rosemary Finch, quiet secretary, was a subject. She was meeting an asset, and someone in this loft had authorization for termination. The open window, the vantage point. Had they terminated her? Pulled her up here? But there was no blood, no sign of violence in the loft.
Unless the termination was a disappearance, a clean erase. He heard a noise, a soft scuff from the far end of the loft, deep in the shadows beyond the reach of the window light. Rook drew his gun. "Police, show yourself!" Silence. Then a rustle, the sound of something moving fast through debris. Rook moved toward it, his heart hammering. He saw a dark shape dart behind a support column. "Freeze!" A figure exploded from the shadows, not toward him, but toward a fire escape door Rook hadn't seen, rusted and half off its hinges. It was a man, tall, dressed in dark workman's clothes. He slammed through the door and out onto the iron platform. Rook followed, bursting out into the cold, wet air 5 stories above the alley. The man was already scrambling down the rickety fire escape with the agility of a cat. Rook gave chase, his bad leg screaming in protest as he clattered down the iron steps. The man hit the alley floor and sprinted toward the mouth that led to Lanton Street. Rook fired a warning shot into the wet brick. The man didn't flinch, disappearing around the corner. By the time Rook reached the street, panting, his leg on fire, the man was gone, swallowed by the fog and the labyrinth of alleys. He had gotten a glimpse, tall, lean, a face obscured by a cap in the gloom. Nothing more. He returned to the loft, his mind racing. The watcher had been here, just now. He'd left in a hurry, but he'd left the typewriter, the photos, the bedroll. He was flushing the nest because Rook had found it. The note at the scene had been a delaying tactic, a misdirection to keep eyes off the 5th floor long enough for him to clear out. It had almost worked. Rook took the typewriter and the photos. He had the evidence of a surveillance operation. He had the connection to the aviary. He had the ominous word, termination. But he had no body, and he had no watcher. He needed to know who the man in the zoot suit was, the asset, the key to whatever operation Rosemary was involved in. That night, Rook went to Jackson Street. The aviary was a basement club, the air thick with smoke, sweat in the brassy wail of a trumpet. It was a world away from Lanton Street, vibrant, alive, pulsing with a dangerous energy. He showed the photo to the bartender, a massive man with a shaved head. The bartender's eyes narrowed. "You don't want to be asking about that man, detective." "Who is he?"
A voice, smooth as aged whiskey, spoke from behind him. "He's a man who flies where he wants, detective, and you're a man with a net." Rook turned. The speaker was a woman in a crimson dress that seemed to drink the low light. She was beautiful in a way that was more threat than invitation, with eyes that saw everything and gave nothing away. She was the club's singer. Her name, he would learn, was Evelyn Vance. "I'm looking for a girl," Rook said, showing her Rosemary's photo. Evelyn took the photo, her expression unreadable. Rosie. She had dreams bigger than Lantern Street, and taste in men that was worse. She handed the photo back. "The man is Lucius Thorne. He's a procurer of rare things, information, people, art, whatever pays. He works for people who don't like questions." She leaned close, her perfume a mix of gardenia and something sharper. "If Rosie got mixed up with Lucius and his clients, then she didn't just vanish, detective. She was retired, and the pension plan is fatal." She left the aviary, the rain a cold shock after the club's heat. He had a name. He had a motive that was about secrets, not sex. And he had a phantom in the 5th-floor loft who typed warnings and talked about termination. The fog on Lantern Street wasn't just meteorological. It was the perfect cover for a world where people were assets and secrets were currency. And somewhere in that fog, Rosemary Finch was either a ghost or a prisoner, and Lucius Thorne held the key. His next move was to find the procurer, but he knew he was now being watched by the man in the loft, a professional who had already proven he could vanish into thin air. The 5th-floor loft reveals a surveillance nest, photos of Rosemary, a typewriter that matches the note, and evidence of a professional operation with talk of termination. The Phantom Watcher escapes, but Rook gets a lead. A mysterious man in the zoot suit named Lucius Thorne, a procurer from the jazz underworld. Rosemary wasn't just a secretary. She was a player in a dangerous game of secrets. The Watcher is a professional, Thorne is a fixer, and Rosemary is the missing piece between them. Rook must now descend into the shadowy world of post-war Seattle's black market to find a girl who knew too much and the men who wanted her silent. To follow the trail from the rainy street to the smoky jazz club and beyond, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The procurement has turned deadly.
Lucius Thorne wasn't in the phone book. He wasn't in any police file Rook could access. He was a rumor with good tailoring, a ghost who operated in the spaces between the legitimate and the damned. To find him, Rook had to go back to the street, to the people who lived in those spaces. He started with Mickey, the night watchman, but not on his rounds. He found him in his preferred tavern, a hole in the wall called the Drenched Rat. After a couple of whiskeys paid for by the city, Mickey's tongue loosened. "Thorne? Yeah, I know the name. Not a guy you see, a guy you hear about. He's like the fog. He's there, then he ain't. He moves things, sometimes people. Got connections on the docks, with the Chinese up in Chinatown, with the music crowd. They say he worked for the OSS during the war. Got a taste for the exotic. Now he procures for rich folks with peculiar tastes." "Did you ever see him with the Finch girl?" Rook pushed a third whiskey across the sticky table. Mickey squinted, his memory swimming in alcohol. "Maybe, once, a few weeks back. A car, fancy like Sally said, idling up on First. She got in. Didn't look like she was being dragged, looked like she was expected." He leaned in, his breath a toxic cloud. "But here's the thing, detective. That 5th floor you've been asking about, it ain't been empty as long as people think. Before your watcher, there was another guy, a city inspector, or so he said. Came around asking about the building's structural integrity after the '49 earthquake. Spent a lot of time up there. He had a briefcase. Never saw him leave with it." A city inspector, or someone posing as one. Planting something or retrieving something. The loft was a perfect dead drop, a hidden, controlled location with a view of the street. Rook's next stop was the docks.
The air was thick with the smell of fish, creosote, and diesel. He found a foreman named O'Leary who'd been on the waterfront for 40 years. At the mention of Thorne's name, O'Leary spat into the murky water. Snake in a silk suit. He uses the ports, not for shipping, for meetings. Private boats coming in at night, no customs. I seen him once meeting a Japanese gentleman off a freighter from Hong Kong last year. Not many Japs around here since the war, you notice. This one was different. Looked like a banker. They exchanged a case. Thorne took it. Hong Kong, the Orient, exotic imports. Information? The matchbook from the aviary linked Thorne to the jazz scene, but his procurement might be international. Rook then used his police credentials, thinly, to access customs manifests at the Port Authority. He looked for anomalies around the time of the supposed Japanese meeting. He found it. A crate listed as ceramic figurines from Hong Kong, destined for a dummy corporation, inspected and cleared with unusual speed. The inspecting agent's signature was illegible. The crate's ultimate destination was a warehouse not on Lantern Street, but in the industrial district, a place called Puget Storage, Unit 44. It was a thread. Maybe the crate, maybe something else, but it was a physical location connected to Thorne's shadowy trade. Before he could check it, he needed to understand Rosemary's role. Why would a shipping company secretary be of interest to an international procurer? He went back to Corbett & Sons, this time after hours, using the key he'd taken from the manager. He went through the company's recent shipping ledgers, focusing on Pacific routes. Corbett & Sons mostly handled domestic coastal freight, lumber to California, apples to Alaska. But he found a curious set of entries from the spring of 1952. Several shipments, all small, classified as machine parts, destined for a company in Portland called Northwest Aeronautical. The bills of lading were co-signed by Gerald Corbett and, as the approving agent of the recipient, Lucius Thorne. Machine parts to an aeronautical company? But Thorne wasn't an engineer, he was a fixer, and the values declared on the forms were suspiciously low. Rook's mind, trained in the war to see patterns of deception, saw it. A false manifest. The machine parts could be anything. Technology, weapons, blueprints. And Rosemary, the secretary who typed the bills of lading, would have seen the name. She would have known the values were wrong. Had she confronted someone? Had she tried to leverage that knowledge? Or had Thorne recruited her? A quiet, intelligent girl with access to shipping paperwork, the perfect inside asset. He remembered the half-typed note from the loft. Subject maintains contact with asset. Subject, Rosemary. Asset, Thorne. She was maintaining contact with him. For whom? Who was the watcher working for? The pieces were forming a terrifying picture. Rosemary was a mole, planted or turned, feeding information about Thorne's operations through Corbett & Sons to someone else. The watcher in the loft was likely a spy, photographing classified documents in a hidden darkroom. Rosemary's disappearance was a move in a high-stakes espionage game. But why leave the note? Don't look up. It was a message for the handler, not the police. A signal that the operation was blown, the nest compromised. The watcher had left it for his own people, but Rook had found it first. Rook needed to get to Puget Storage, but as he left the Corbett building, he felt it again, the prickling sense of being observed. He looked up at the fifth-floor window. It was dark now, closed. He scanned the street. A man reading a newspaper in a parked car, a woman window shopping in the rain. Anyone could be a watcher. He drove to the industrial district, a canyon of corrugated steel and potholed streets under the viaduct. Puget Storage was a long, low building of rusting Quonset huts. Unit 44 was in the back. The padlock was heavy, new. Rook didn't have a warrant, but he had a bad feeling and a lockpick set from his army days. It took him 2 minutes. He swung the corrugated door up. The unit was not filled with crates. It was set up as a dark room. Shelves held chemical trays, enlargers, rolls of film, and pinned on a string across the back wall were dozens of photographic negatives hanging to dry. He held one up to the bare bulb overhead. It was a photograph of a document, a technical schematic, complex, dense with mathematical notations. At the bottom was a stamped classification, restricted, Department of Defense, Project Yardarm. Yardarm he'd never heard of, but the schematic looked like some kind of advanced aerodynamics, a wing design, or a missile fin. The other negatives were similar, pages of equations, diagrams of machinery, lists of materials, all classified, all stolen. This was the procurement. Lucius Thorne wasn't moving figurines. He was trafficking in stolen military secrets. And Rosemary Finch, the secretary at a shipping company used to move the physical components, had somehow become entangled in the espionage. The darkroom was a processing lab. The watcher in the loft wasn't just surveilling Rosemary. He was probably the photographer, documenting the documents she smuggled out. Or was he watching her to see if she talked? As Rook stood in the eerie red glow of the safe light, the pieces locked into place with a final chilling click. This wasn't a missing persons case. It was a counterintelligence operation. Rosemary was either a traitor or a pawn. Thorne was the broker, and the Watcher worked for someone, the government, a rival power, a corporation who wanted Thorne's pipeline exposed or hijacked. The note, the shoe, the disappearance was a cover-up, a way to vanish a girl who knew too much while sending a signal through the fog to the players in the game. Rook was no longer a detective solving a crime. He was an intruder in a spy war, and he had just walked into the darkroom where the film was developed. He needed to find Lucius Thorne before the Watch's employers did, and he needed to find out if Rosemary Finch was a victim, a villain, or already just another negative, developed and filed away in the endless gray archive of Cold War secrets. The investigation explodes in scope. Lucius Thorne is a procurer of stolen military secrets, using Corbett & Sons as a front. Rosemary Finch had access to the incriminating shipping manifests. The fifth-floor watcher was likely a spy, photographing classified documents in a hidden darkroom. Rosemary's disappearance is a move in a high-stakes espionage game. Rook is now in over his head, holding photographic evidence of a project called Yardarm that could get him killed. The simple missing girl case has vanished, replaced by a labyrinth of treason and fog-bound dead drops. To see if Rook can navigate this intelligence nightmare and find Rosemary before she becomes a permanent casualty of the Cold War, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The film is developing.
The air in the dark room was thick with the acrid smell of fixer and fear. Rook stared at the hanging negatives, ghosts of secrets that could start wars or end careers. Project Yardarm. He had to move. He couldn't take the negatives. They were too fragile, too damning, but he needed proof. He found a stack of fresh photographic paper. In the crimson gloom, working with the instinct of a man who'd developed reconnaissance photos in a Pacific jungle, he made a single print. He chose a negative that showed a schematic with the Project Yardarm stamp clearest. He slid the paper into the developer tray, watching as the image emerged, a complex lattice of lines and numbers, a ghost made solid. He fixed it, washed it quickly in a tray of water, and stuffed the damp print inside his coat. He closed the storage unit, making sure the padlock looked undisturbed. The rain had picked up, hammering on the Quonset hut's roof. He drove away, his mind a storm of connections. Thorne was selling secrets. Rosemary was the leak inside Corbett. The Watcher was either Thorne's security, ensuring she didn't double-cross him, or he was from the buyers, ensuring Thorne delivered. The authorization for termination suggested the latter. The buyers had decided to cut out the middleman or silence a liability. He needed to find Thorne. The aviary was a start, but Thorne would be in the wind now, knowing his operation was compromised. Rook had one other lead, the city inspector Mickey had mentioned, the man who'd left a briefcase in the fifth-floor loft. He went to City Hall in the morning, a damp, imposing building that smelled of wet wool and bureaucracy. The Department of Buildings and Inspections was a maze of cubbies and ledger books. A clerk, after much persuasion and the flash of his badge, dug out records for inspections on the Corbett building. There was an inspection filed for September 10, 1952, Inspector J. Smith.
a common name, likely false. The report was generic, citing minor masonry fatigue, recommend monitoring. The signature was a scribble, but the clerk remembered the man. Tall fellow, quiet, wore a nice coat for an inspector, had a briefcase, yeah, acted like he owned the place. Did he file any other inspections around that time? The clerk checked. Yeah, here's another, for the Baldwin Hotel over on 2nd, same day. The Baldwin Hotel was a faded, genteel establishment, known for renting rooms by the week for traveling salesmen and ladies of discreet reputation. It was also, Rook knew, a place where meetings that required no questions could be held. He went to the Baldwin. The manager, a nervous man with a comb-over, was reluctant. Rook showed him the photo of Lucius Thorne. "Have you seen this man?" The manager's eyes widened. He rents a suite, pays in cash, 6 months in advance, suite 5C. Is he there now? Haven't seen him in days. Who else visits? The manager hesitated. A girl, young, pretty, mousy, came a few times, always in the evening. Rosemary. And another man, older, sharp dresser but not flashy like Mr. Thorne, carried a doctor's bag, but he wasn't a doctor. He had cold eyes. The Watcher, or another player. Rook went to suite 5C. The manager's master key opened it. The suite was a paradox. The sitting room was opulent in a generic way, good furniture, a stocked bar, a view of the rain-swept street. But the bedroom had been turned into an office. A large drafting table held aeronautical charts, not of Seattle, but of the Korean Peninsula and the Sea of Japan. A shortwave radio sat on a side table, and in a locked filing cabinet, which Rook pried open with a fireplace poker, he found Thorne's real ledger. It was a coded list of transactions, not in dollars, but in letters and numbers. But next to each entry was a name or a location. He saw Corbett, Finch, Yardarm, 1017, circled in red, the night she vanished. Next to it, another entry, Buyer, V, Dead Drop, 5th floor, 1017, confirmed. A buyer, initial V, a dead drop on the 5th floor, confirmed on the 17th. The exchange was supposed to happen the night she disappeared. The Watcher was there to confirm it or to intercept it. But the ledger had another earlier entry that froze Rook's blood. Asset acquisition, Finch via blackmail, Seattle PD file 2297. Rosemary hadn't been a willing spy. She'd been blackmailed, and the leverage was a Seattle PD file, Rook's own department. The air in the dark room was thick with the acrid smell of fixer and fear. Rook stared at the hanging negatives, ghosts of secrets that could start wars or end careers. Project Yardarm. He had to move. He couldn't take the negatives. They were too fragile, too damning, but he needed proof. He found a stack of fresh photographic paper. In the crimson gloom, working with the instinct of a man who'd developed reconnaissance photos in a Pacific jungle, he made a single print. He chose a negative that showed a schematic with the Project Yardarm stamp clearest. He slid the paper into the developer tray, watching as the image emerged, a complex lattice of lines and numbers, a ghost made solid. He fixed it, washed it quickly in a tray of water, and stuffed the damp print inside his coat. He closed the storage unit, making sure the padlock looked undisturbed. The rain had picked up, hammering on the Quonset hut's roof. He drove away, his mind a storm of connections. Thorne was selling secrets. Rosemary was the leak inside Corbett. The Watcher was either Thorne's security, ensuring she didn't double-cross him, or he was from the buyers, ensuring Thorne delivered. The authorization for termination suggested the latter. The buyers had decided to cut out the middleman or silence a liability. He needed to find Thorne. The aviary was a start, but Thorne would be in the wind now, knowing his operation was compromised. Rook had one other lead, the city inspector Mickey had mentioned, the man who'd left a briefcase in the 5th floor loft. He went to City Hall in the morning, a damp, imposing building that smelled of wet wool and bureaucracy. The Department of Buildings and Inspections was a maze of cubbies and ledger books. A clerk, after much persuasion and the flash of his badge, dug out records for inspections on the Corbett building. There was an inspection filed for September 10, 1952. Inspector J. Smith, a common name, likely false. The report was generic, citing minor masonry fatigue, recommend monitoring. The signature was a scribble, but the clerk remembered the man. Tall fellow, quiet, wore a nice coat for an inspector. Had a briefcase, yeah, acted like he owned the place. Did he file any other inspections around that time? The clerk checked. Yeah, here's another, for the Baldwin Hotel over on 2nd, same day. The Baldwin Hotel was a faded, genteel establishment, known for renting rooms by the week for traveling salesmen and ladies of discreet reputation. It was also, Rook knew, a place where meetings that required no questions could be held. He went to the Baldwin. The manager, a nervous man with a comb-over, was reluctant. Rook showed him the photo of Lucius Thorne. "Have you seen this man?" The manager's eyes widened. He rents a suite, pays in cash, 6 months in advance, suite 5C. Is he there now? Haven't seen him in days. Who else visits? The manager hesitated. A girl, young, pretty, mousy, came a few times, always in the evening. Rosemary. And another man, older, sharp dresser, but not flashy like Mr. Thorne. Carried a doctor's bag, but he wasn't a doctor. He had cold eyes. The Watcher, or another player. Rook went to suite 5C. The manager's master key opened it. The suite was a paradox. The sitting room was opulent in a generic way, good furniture, a stocked bar, a view of the rain-swept street. But the bedroom had been turned into an office. A large drafting table held aeronautical charts, not of Seattle, but of the Korean Peninsula and the Sea of Japan. A shortwave radio sat on a side table, and in a locked filing cabinet, which Rook pried open with a fireplace poker, he found Thorne's real ledger. It was a coded list of transactions, not in dollars, but in letters and numbers. But next to each entry was a name or a location. He saw Corbett, Finch, Yardarm, 1017, circled in red, the night she vanished. Next to it, another entry, Buyer, V, Dead Drop, 5th floor, 1017, confirmed. A buyer, initial V, a dead drop on the 5th floor, confirmed on the 17th. The exchange was supposed to happen the night she disappeared. The Watcher was there to confirm it or to intercept it. But the ledger had another earlier entry that froze Rook's blood. Asset acquisition, Finch via blackmail, Seattle PD file 2297. Rosemary hadn't been a willing spy. She'd been blackmailed, and the leverage was a Seattle PD file, Rook's own department.
He drove back to headquarters, a pit of dread in his stomach. File 2297 was archived. It was a juvenile record, sealed. He used his authority to pull it. The name on the file was Rosemary Finch. The charge, from 1948, when she was 19, accessory to grand larceny. The co-accused, Liam Byrne, her boyfriend at the time. They'd been caught trying to pawn stolen jewelry from a house Liam had burglarized. She claimed she didn't know it was stolen. Liam took the fall, went to prison. Her record was sealed. She got probation. Liam Byrne was released from Monroe Penitentiary in June of 1952, 4 months ago. Thorne had found this buried sin. He had used it to turn her. Do this for me, feed me information from Corbett's shipping manifests, or I send this to your mother, to her employer. The quiet secretary with a secret, a perfect, vulnerable asset. But something had gone wrong. Maybe she'd grown a conscience. Maybe she'd tried to back out. Or maybe the buyer, V, had decided to cut Thorne out and deal directly with the source, Rosemary. The meeting on the 17th was a trap, for her or for Thorne. Rook had to find Liam Byrne. The ex-con might know where Rosemary would run, or he might be part of the mess. Byrne's parole officer gave an address in Ballard, a boarding house for men down on their luck. Rook found him in a tiny, damp room, a hollow-eyed man in his late 20s, the wariness of prison still on him. He was shocked to hear Rosemary was missing. Rosie? No. She was clean. She was gonna be clean. We weren't together no more, but she helped me when I got out, got me this room. He looked guilty, haunted. She was scared lately, said she'd gotten mixed up in something bad because of me, because of our past. She said a man in a fancy suit had her through the throat. Lucius Thorne? Byrne nodded. She mentioned that name, said he made her copy papers at work, give them to him. She didn't know what they were, but she knew it was wrong. Last time I saw her, she said she had a way out. She was meeting someone who could make it all go away, a government man. She was going to trade what she knew for a clean slate. A government man? The watcher? Or the buyer, V? When was this? 2 days before she vanished. She was supposed to call me after, let me know she was okay. She never did. So Rosemary had been trying to double-cross Thorne, to betray him to a rival intelligence agent or a federal investigator. The meeting on Lantern Street was her rendezvous with this government man, but the watcher was there. Had the government man been the watcher, or had the watcher been Thorne's security, there to stop the betrayal? The note, "Don't look up," took on a new, horrific meaning. It wasn't just about the loft, it was a warning about the whole operation. Don't look up the chain, don't ask who's really pulling the strings. Rook left Byrne, promising to find her. He had a theory now, fragile as the photographic print in his pocket. Rosemary had gone to the meeting on Lantern Street. The exchange, her information for her freedom, was to happen via the dead drop on the 5th floor. She goes up, or the government man goes up. But the watcher was already there. Something went wrong. A struggle. The watcher terminates the meeting, takes Rosemary, leaves the shoe and the note as a signal or a false flag. He takes her where? Thorne would be looking for her too, and the buyer V would be furious the deal was botched. Rook was standing in the middle of a three-way crossfire, and the only person who knew the whole truth was a missing secretary whose last act of defiance was to drop a shoe in a gutter and hope someone would be stupid enough or brave enough to look up. He drove back toward Lantern Street as dusk fell, the fog already coiling in the alleys. He needed to recanvass. Someone else had to have seen something that night, someone the fog hadn't hidden. He was looking for a government man in a sea of gray, a needle in a haystack of secrets, and he knew with every ticking second Rosemary Finch's time was running out if it hadn't already expired in the cold, damp grip of a professional who talked about termination like it was a clerical task. The blackmail is revealed. Rosemary's sealed juvenile record forced her into espionage. She tried to escape by betraying Thorne to a government man. The meeting on Lantern Street was her trap or her salvation. The watcher in the loft was likely the government contact or Thorne's enforcer. Rook now understands he's in a three-way game between a blackmailer, a spy, and a desperate girl. The note is a literal warning about the dead drop and a metaphorical one about the powers involved. With the wet photo of Project Yardarm burning a hole in his coat, Rook must find the government man and race against Thorne's retaliation to see if he can untangle the web before Rosemary pays the ultimate price for knowing too much. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The exposure is complete.
The fog on Lantern Street was a living thing, a collaborator in the crime. Rook stood where Rosemary's shoe had been, the damp seeping through his shoes, and tried to see through the veil of that night. A government man, not a cop. Federal? Military intelligence? The newly formed CIA? He went back to Sally at the Blue Parrot Diner, pushing a photo of a generic, serious-looking man in a suit from an old FBI wanted poster across the Formica counter. Not the driver, someone else, maybe on foot, maybe meeting the girl. Sally squinted, refilling his coffee. I seen a guy, not that night, but the day before. Came in here, sat in that booth, ordered pie, didn't eat it, just watched the street. Wore a raincoat, but it was good quality. Had that look, like he was thinking about equations, not the pie. He left a big tip. Did you see him talk to anyone? Just the waitress, but he used the phone in the back. Talked low. I caught one word. Sounded like verification. Verification. Confirming the meet. Rook checked the phone company records for the diner's number on the 16th. A call was placed to a number in an Olympia exchange, the state capital, where government offices were.
He drove to Olympia the next day, a gray journey through dripping evergreens. The number belonged to a private line in the Washington State Department of Commerce and Economic Development, a bland, innocuous cover, perfect for an intelligence front. He bluffed his way into the building, flashing his Seattle PD badge and talking about interjurisdiction cooperation on a port security matter. He was directed to a small windowless office on the third floor. The name on the door was V. Gray. V. Gray, the buyer V from Thorne's ledger. The office was empty, clean to the point of sterility. A desk, a chair, a filing cabinet. No personal effects. Rook picked the lock on the cabinet. It contained files on aviation industry development and trade with East Asia. Buried among them was a folder with no label. Inside, surveillance reports on Lucius Thorne and a photograph of Rosemary Finch with a handwritten note, "Asset is compromised. Pressure from Thorne unsustainable. Recommend extraction and debrief, 10:15. Extraction. They were going to pull her out. The meeting on the 17th was an extraction, but it had gone wrong. V. Gray was the government man. He was running Rosemary as an asset against Thorne, likely to roll up his espionage ring. But the watcher in the loft, was he Gray's man, or was he Thorne's, there to stop the extraction? Rook needed to find Gray. He waited outside the building until 5. Employees trickled out. A man matching Sally's description, mid-40s, sharp-featured, wearing a trench coat, emerged and walked briskly toward a parking lot. Rook followed. Gray drove a nondescript Chevrolet. He didn't go home. He drove to a residential neighborhood in North Olympia, parked, and entered a modest bungalow. Lights came on. Rook gave him 30 minutes, then approached. He knocked. Gray answered, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to guarded neutrality when he saw Rook's badge. "Can I help you, officer?" "Detective Rook, Seattle PD. I'm investigating the disappearance of Rosemary Finch. I believe you were meeting her on the night of the 17th. Gray's face didn't change, but his eyes went flat like shutters closing. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave." "I've seen your file. Asset is compromised. Recommend extraction. You were her handler. What happened at the extraction?" Gray stepped back, started to close the door. Rook put his foot in it. "A girl is missing, Mr. Gray, or should I call you V?" The use of the initial broke his composure. He sighed, the sound of a man carrying a heavy weight. "Come in, quickly." Inside, the house was as impersonal as the office. Gray didn't offer a seat. "Finch was an asset we cultivated. Thorne was blackmailing her. We offered her a way out. Give us Thorne, we bury her past and give her a new start. The exchange was set for the 17th. She was to bring samples of the material she'd been passing him, shipping manifests, anything. We'd confirm it, then move in on Thorne. But you didn't. No, because we weren't the only ones at the party." Gray's voice was tight. "We had a man on the 5th floor as a spotter to confirm her arrival and ensure she wasn't followed. His name was Miller. He radioed that she had arrived, alone. Then he said, 'Unexpected company, male, armed.' Then the line went dead. By the time our backup arrived, Miller was gone. So was the girl. Only her shoe and bag were left. And that note."
Miller typed the note. No, Miller carried a pistol and a radio, not a typewriter. The note was someone else's work. A third party. Someone who knew about the drop, knew we'd be looking, and wanted to warn us off. Or taunt us. A third party. Not Thorne, not Gray. Who? The real buyer of the secrets? A rival agency? Where's Miller now? Missing. Presumed compromised. Gray said it like discarding a used tool. And the unexpected company, male, armed. Could it have been Thorne? Possibly, or one of his enforcers, or someone we haven't identified. Gray looked at Rook, assessing him. "You have the look of a man who's seen more than he should. What have you found, detective?" Rook decided to show his hand. He took out the damp photographic print of the Project Yardarm schematic and laid it on Gray's sterile coffee table. Gray's breath hissed between his teeth. He didn't touch it. "Where did you get this?" "Storage unit, connected to Thorne. He's not just brokering shipping manifests. He's trafficking in classified aeronautics.
This is why you were after him, isn't it? Not for blackmailing a secretary, for selling secrets that could tip the balance in Korea." Gray was silent for a long moment. Project Yardarm is a tail-sitting VTOL fighter prototype. It could revolutionize carrier warfare. The Soviets would pay a fortune for it. Thorne got his hands on a partial set of schematics from a disgruntled engineer at Boeing. He was using Corbett's manifests to ship the physical prototype components, special alloys, gyroscopic parts, to a front in Portland, where they'd be crated for overseas shipment. Finch was our window into the manifest side. We needed the full chain, the documents, the components, the buyer. And now the chain is broken. Miller is gone. Finch is gone. And Thorne is in the wind. Thorne is scared. His operation is exposed. He'll either run or he'll try to complete the deal before the window slams shut. He'll need to find a new way to verify the components or a new courier for the documents. Or he'll come for the source, the engineer, the disgruntled engineer, to get the rest of the plans or to silence him. Gray nodded grimly. His name is Alden Voss, worked at Boeing Plant 2. He was suspended 2 months ago for security irregularities. He's been under our surveillance, but he's a slippery one, paranoid. Rook had a new target, Alden Voss, the leak. If Thorne was desperate, he'd go to Voss. If Gray was right, Voss might be Rosemary's only chance, if Thorne had taken her alive to use as leverage against the engineer. But there was still the third party, the man with the typewriter in the loft who wasn't Miller, the one who left the note. Was he the buyer? A Soviet agent cutting out Thorne? If so, he had Miller, and he might have Rosemary. The chessboard had 4 players: Thorne, Gray, the third party, and Rook. And the pawns were all missing: Rosemary, Miller, Voss. The game was an endgame, and the next move could be a bloody checkmate. Rook left Gray with a warning. "Find Miller, and if you hear anything about the girl, you call me. This isn't just your spy game anymore. It's my city, and a girl is missing in it." He drove back to Seattle in the dark, the rain on the windshield like Morse code he couldn't decipher. He was no longer just a detective. He was a player, holding a photograph that was a death warrant, hunting a traitorous engineer to find a missing girl, while a phantom with a typewriter watched from the shadows. The fog on Lantern Street had spread, covering the whole state, and he was driving blind into the heart of it. The government man is revealed: V. Gray, state intelligence running Rosemary as an asset against Thorne. The extraction was botched by a third party, an armed man who took out Gray's spotter, Miller, and likely took Rosemary. This third party left the typewritten note. Thorne, now exposed and desperate, will likely target the source of the secrets, a Boeing engineer named Alden Voss. Rook is now caught in a 4-way espionage battle. To find Rosemary, he must find Voss before Thorne does and identify the mysterious third party who types warnings and collects people. The simple disappearance has become a race for a traitorous engineer and a fight for America's secrets. To follow Rook as he hunts the human source in the shadow of Boeing's war machines, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The third party is watching.
Alden Voss lived in a world of whispered numbers and the constant low-grade fear of men who trade in the future of flight. His house was in the suburb of Renton, not far from the sprawling Boeing plant where the B-52 Stratus Fortress was being born. It was a modest post-war rambler, but it stood out. The curtains were always drawn, the lawn was overgrown, a large, unfriendly dog patrolled the backyard. Rook watched the house for a day from a rented sedan. No sign of Thorne, no sign of anyone, just the silent, watchful house and the distant drone of aircraft engines from the nearby airfield. He decided to approach directly. He was a detective, after all. He walked to the front door, ignoring the growls from the backyard. He knocked. After a long minute, a voice came from behind the door, thin and strained. "Who is it?" "Seattle Police, Mr. Voss. Detective Rook. I need to speak with you about a security matter." A chain rattled. The door opened a crack, secured by a brass security bar. One pale, bloodshot eye peered out. Alden Voss was in his 50s, with the gaunt, trembly look of a man who'd been living on coffee and dread. "Show me your badge."
Rook held it up. Voss scrutinized it. Then the bar withdrew. Quickly. The inside of the house was a museum of paranoia. Newspapers were stacked floor to ceiling. Every window had a homemade alarm, a tread tied to a tin can full of marbles. A shortwave radio crackled with static in the corner. The air smelled of stale sweat and ozone. "They're watching me," Voss said without preamble, pacing the cramped living room. "The company, the government, the others." "What others, Mr. Voss?" "The ones who want what's in my head. Yardarm. They think I stole it. I didn't steal it. I saw it. I understood its potential and its peril. A tail sitter, imagine. But the inertia, the gyroscopic stress, the designs were flawed. Dangerously flawed. I tried to tell them. They called me an alarmist, suspended me." He was talking fast, his hands sketching frantic shapes in the air. "Then he came." "Lucius Thorne?" Voss flinched at the name. "He said he could get my concerns to the right people, people who would appreciate the truth. He wanted my notes, my corrections to the schematics. He said it was for a scholarly journal overseas. I knew he was lying, but he offered money, a lot of money, to disappear." His eyes filled with a pathetic hope. "I gave him some. Preliminary stuff, not the core calculations. Then I got scared. I stopped returning his calls." "Did a woman ever contact you? Rosemary Finch?" Voss shook his head wildly. "No women, just him and the watchers." "What watchers?" "The ones in the car, different car every few days, and the man on the telephone. He called last week, a different voice, calm, cold. He said, 'The material is incomplete. The buyer is unhappy. You will provide the remainder, or we will provide motivation.'" Voss is shaking now. What does that mean, motivation? It meant they would hurt someone he loved, but Voss was a loner, no family, except his leverage might be his own life, or they could have found another pressure point. "Have you seen anyone unusual around the house lately? A man with a typewriter?" Voss stared at him as if he were mad. A typewriter? The third party was more subtle than that. The calm, cold voice on the phone, that was the third party, the real buyer, cutting out Thorne and dealing directly with the source, using threats instead of blackmail. "You need to come with me, Mr. Voss. You're not safe here." "No, I'm safe here. My systems," he gestured to the threads and cans. Rook's patience snapped. "Your systems won't stop a professional. They've already taken a girl, probably killed a government agent. You're next, either for what's in your head or to silence you. Now, pack a bag. You're going into protective custody." The word custody triggered something in Voss. His eyes widened in terror. "No, not the government. They're in on it. They want to bury me, bury the floss." He backed towards a hallway. "Get out." Rook moved to stop him, but Voss was surprisingly fast. He darted down the hall, slammed a door. Rook heard a lock turn, then the sound of a window being forced. He cursed, running to the front door and around the side of the house. Voss was scrambling over his back fence, his dog barking furiously. He dropped into the alley and sprinted away, a scarecrow in flight. Rook returned to the house, defeated. He searched it quickly, looking for Voss's notes. He found nothing. The man likely buried them or carried them with him. The only thing of interest was the notepad by the telephone. The top sheet had indentions from previous writing. He held it at an angle to the light. A phone number was pressed into the paper. He recognized the prefix. It was a Seattle exchange for the First Hill neighborhood, a wealthy area.
The rain on the windshield of Rook's parked sedan was a slow, monotonous metronome marking the passage of dread-filled hours. The lights in Dr. Crow's townhouse had shifted, from the study to an upstairs room, then to the basement, a soft, almost imperceptible glow seeping through a ground-level window well. Each change felt like a move on a chessboard Rook could only half see. His leak to the Post-Intelligencer was a live grenade tossed onto the manicured lawn of Seattle's elite. If Crow was connected, he'd know by morning. The question was, would he flee, hide his prizes, or eliminate them? Just after 2 a.m., the front door opened. Crow emerged, not in a hurry, but with purpose. He was dressed for travel, a heavy coat, leather gloves. He carried not the doctor's bag, but a small, hard-sided suitcase.
He walked to the Packard, placed the case in the trunk, and drove away, the car's taillights dissolving into the mist-shrouded streets of First Hill. Rook gave him a block's lead, then followed. The late-night streets were empty, a black-and-white film set. The Packard didn't head for the highway or the docks. It drove south, through the International District, past the sleeping warehouses of the Industrial District, and onto the West Seattle Bridge. The high, narrow span arced over the Duwamish River, offering a view of the inky black harbor dotted with the lonely lights of freighters. Crow didn't cross into West Seattle. Halfway across the bridge, he pulled onto the narrow, rarely used service shoulder. Rook killed his lights and stopped 100 yards back, watching through binoculars. Crow got out. He went to the trunk, removed the suitcase, and walked to the railing. For a heart-stopping moment, Rook thought he was going to drop it into the abyss. Instead, he simply stood there, a silhouette against the foggy glow of the city, as if waiting. 3 minutes later, another set of headlights approached from the West Seattle side. A truck, a dark, unmarked panel van, pulled up behind the Packard. A man got out. Even at a distance, Rook recognized the tall, lean frame, the efficient movements. It was the watcher from the loft, the man who'd escaped down the fire escape. The man exchanged a few words with Crow, took the suitcase, and placed it in the back of the van. Then he handed Crow a large manila envelope, an exchange. Crow was passing off the prize, Voss's completed schematics, the fruits of his interrogation of Rosemary or Miller, to his operational lieutenant. The watcher was the field agent, the one who did the wet work in the fog. Crow was the brain, the client, the spider at the center. The watcher got back in the van and drove off, back toward West Seattle. Rook followed Crow back to the townhouse. The doctor went inside. The lights stayed off. The house was a silent monolith once more. Rook couldn't wait for daylight. The exchange meant an endgame was in motion. He circled the block, looking for a way in. The basement window well he'd seen glowing earlier was his best bet. It was covered by a rusty decorative iron grate. He pried it loose with a tire iron from his trunk, the screech of metal swallowed by the constant Seattle drip. The window was locked, but the latch was old. He used a knife to jimmy it. He slid the sash up and dropped into darkness. He landed on a concrete floor in a coal cellar that had been converted into a storage room. The air was cold, smelling of dust and something else, antiseptic, like a doctor's office. A thin line of light showed under a door at the far end.
He drew his revolver and moved silently to the door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open a crack. The room beyond was a shock. It was not a dungeon. It was a clinic. A clean, well-lit space with a stainless steel examination table, surgical instruments on a tray, glass cabinets filled with pharmaceuticals. And on the table, restrained by leather straps at the wrists and ankles, lay a man Rook didn't recognize. He was in his 30s, fit, with a bruise on his temple. He was unconscious, an IV drip in his arm. Miller, the government spotter. But no Rosemary. Rook stepped inside. Miller was alive, his chest rising and falling slowly, sedated. Crow wasn't torturing him. He was keeping him in storage, a living piece of evidence, or a future bargaining chip. A sound from above, a floorboard creaking. Rook froze. Footsteps crossed the ceiling, moving toward the stairs that presumably led down to the basement. He had seconds. He looked around frantically. There was another door on the opposite wall. He dashed to it, turned the handle. It opened into a small, windowless room. A cell. Empty, but recently used. A thin mattress on a cot, a chair, a plate with crumbs on the floor, a woman's hairpin. Rosemary. She had been here, but the cell was empty now. Had she been moved during the exchange? Was she in the van with the watcher? The basement door at the top of the stairs opened. Light flooded down. Rook slipped back into the clinic, hiding behind the open door just as Crow descended the stairs, his footsteps measured and calm. Crow walked to Miller, checked his pulse, adjusted the IV drip. He hummed a tuneless melody. Then he went to a sink and began meticulously washing his hands as if after a procedure. "You can come out now, detective," Crow said, not turning around, his voice echoing slightly off the tile. "The acoustics in this room are quite precise. I heard your rather graceless entrance." Rook stepped out, gun leveled. "Where is she?" Crow turned, drying his hands on a white towel. He didn't seem surprised or afraid. "Miss Finch? She is in transit, a more secure location. Mr. Miller here is merely sleeping, a barbiturate cocktail. He'll wake with no memory of the last 48 hours, a common side effect of the stress of his failed mission. You're under arrest for kidnapping, for espionage." Crow smiled, a chilling sight. "On what evidence? That you broke into my home and found a patient under my care, a disturbed man I found wandering the streets? I have paperwork, forged, of course, but impeccably. And you have no warrant, no witness. You were the trespasser here." He was right. Rook was over his head, operating outside the law. Anything he found here would be fruit of the poisonous tree. "Why?" Rook asked, stalling, his mind racing. "Why do this? The secrets, the people. You're not a communist, you're a rich man." "Communism is so vulgar, a religion for the masses. I am an aesthete. I collect rare things. And the rarest thing in this modern age is truth. Not the banal truth of who loves whom, but the profound, dangerous truth of how things work. The impure flaw in yardarm. It is a beautiful, catastrophic truth. The Americans will bury it. The Soviets would misuse it. I will appreciate it, own it. And the people who are vessels for such truths, they are part of the collection. Miss Finch had a resilient mind, a certain moral flexibility born of desperation that was fascinating to study. Mr. Miller has a professional's clarity, and Mr. Voss, he is the prize, the source of the beautiful flaw." He was insane, a collector with a god complex, treating human beings as specimens and state secrets as art. "The Watcher works for you. Who is he?" "A specialist, a man who understands silence and fog. He is taking the completed analysis to a buyer, a private concern in Europe with no ideological allegiances, only a love of potential." "And Rosemary? Is she part of the delivery?" "She is a complication. She saw my face. She heard things. She cannot be returned to circulation. But she is also unique. Her handling of the pressure, her attempt to play both sides, it merits further study. My associate will decide her final disposition." Final disposition, a clinical term for murder. The doorbell rang upstairs, a sonorous chime. Crow's smile didn't waver. "Ah, that will be the police, I expect. Your newspaper leak bore fruit faster than I anticipated. Chief Superintendent Malley is a golfing acquaintance. He was kind enough to call and tell me a detective named Rook was making wild accusations. He's sending a car to take you in for a psychiatric evaluation, to discuss your wartime stress." It was a perfect, devastating countermove. Crow had used Rook's own weapon against him, leveraging his connections to turn the police on him. The spider didn't run. He called the exterminator on the fly, bothering his web.
Heavy footsteps sounded above. The door to the street opened. Voices. Rook had one chance. He couldn't be taken into custody. Crow would have him discredited, institutionalized, or worse. He raised his gun. "You're coming with me." Crow didn't flinch. "You shoot me, and you are a murderer. They will gun you down in this basement, and Miss Finch will be lost forever. My associate has his instructions. If I don't call him by dawn, he discards the excess baggage." It was checkmate. The footsteps were on the stairs. Rook made a desperate choice. He turned and ran back into the coal cellar, toward the window he'd entered. He heard shouts behind him. He scrambled out into the cold, wet night as police burst into the basement behind him. He ran into the shadows of the garden, over a fence, into an alley. Sirens wailed in the distance, converging on First Hill. He was now a fugitive, wanted for trespassing and possibly assault, his credibility shattered.
and the only man who knew where Rosemary Finch was had just handed her fate to a ghost in a van heading for West Seattle with a suitcase full of hell. Rook's gambit backfires spectacularly. Inside Crow's basement clinic, he finds Miller sedated and evidence Rosemary was held there, but she's been moved. Crow reveals himself as a monstrous aesthetic collector of dangerous truths and the people who hold them. Before Rook can act, Crow uses his political pull to have the police descend on the house, framing Rook as an unstable trespasser. Now a fugitive, he has lost official standing and must race against time. Rosemary is with the Watcher in a van heading to West Seattle, her final disposition pending. To see if a disgraced detective, hunted by his own department, can track a ghost through the Rainy Peninsula and save a girl who is now just excess baggage, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The hunt is now outlaw.
The rain was his only ally. It washed the streets clean of his footprints and turned the wailing sirens into a distorted echo. Rook ran through the back alleys of First Hill, his bad leg a burning brand of protest, until he found his sedan where he'd hidden it 3 blocks away. He slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove without headlights, navigating by the faint glow of streetlights reflected on wet pavement. He was a cop turned outlaw. Crow's move had been diabolically elegant. By the time the sun came up, there would be a bulletin out for his arrest, citing erratic behavior and trespassing. His only hope was to find the Watcher, find Rosemary, and find evidence so concrete it would blow Crow's story apart. But to do that, he had to stay free. He drove toward the West Seattle Bridge. The van had gone that way. West Seattle in 1952 was a separate world, a peninsula of sleepy neighborhoods, fishing docks, and rugged forested bluffs. A good place to hide, or to make a transfer to a boat. He had no description of the van beyond a dark panel van. It was a needle in a haystack of rain and gloom. He needed an edge. He thought of Mickey the night watchman. The old waterfront hands knew the movements of every vehicle that didn't belong. He drove to the Drenched Rat. It was nearly 4 a.m., but Mickey was there, nursing the dregs of his shift-ending whiskey. Rook pulled him into the reeking men's room. "I need help, Mickey. No questions." Mickey saw the wild look in his eye, the mud on his clothes. "You're in it deep, detective." A dark panel van, new, maybe a Ford or a Chevy, headed over the West Seattle Bridge around 2:30. Where would it go? Not the neighborhoods, somewhere to lay low or to meet a boat. Mickey rubbed his stubbled chin. 2:30. Tide's coming in. If it was a boat meet, it'd be at Salty's old offloading dock, down under the bridge on the Duwamish side. Or there's the Alki Point Lighthouse. Keepers are mostly Coast Guard now, but the old service road is gated. You could park there, unseen, wait for a private craft from the Sound. Alki Point, the very tip of the peninsula, where the fog from the Sound would be thickest, a perfect ghost station. Rook pressed a 20 into Mickey's hand. "Forget you saw me." "Already have, detective." He drove back over the bridge, this time all the way into West Seattle. The roads were empty. He took the winding route toward Alki. The service road was just as Mickey described, a gravel track barred by a chained gate. The chain was new, but the lock was old, rusted shut. The van hadn't come this way. He doubled back, heading for the Duwamish side, the industrial waterway that separated West Seattle from the city proper. The area under the bridge was a nightmare landscape of mud flats, scrap yards, and rotting piers. Salty's old dock was a skeleton of bleached pilings, but next to it was a more solid-looking private wharf with a gravel turnaround. And there, parked in the shadow of the towering bridge support, was a dark panel van. Rook killed his engine and lights 100 yards away. He approached on foot, using the cacophony of rain on corrugated metal roofs as cover. The van was empty, doors locked. He peered through the fogged windows. No suitcase, no people. But the wharf, a set of fresh tire tracks in the mud led right to its edge, and moored at the wharf was a cabin cruiser, a 30-foot Chris-craft, its sleek lines suggesting speed and money. A light glowed in its cabin portal. The exchange was happening on the water. The Watcher had delivered the suitcase to the boat. And Rosemary? Rook had no boat. He was trapped on land.
He watched, helpless, as two figures emerged from the cabin. One was the watcher, tall and lean. The other was a man he didn't recognize, thick-set, wearing a captain's hat. They spoke briefly. The watcher handed over an envelope, payment perhaps, then turned and walked back down the wharf toward the van, alone.
Rosemary wasn't with him. She was either still in the van, unlikely, or already on the boat. The watcher reached the van, opened the driver's door. This was Rook's only chance. He broke from cover, running as fast as his leg would allow, his revolver out. "Freeze! Police!" The watcher turned. In the diffuse light from the bridge, Rook saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than expected, mid-30s, with a sharp, impassive face and eyes that held no fear, only calculation. He didn't reach for a weapon, he simply raised his hands. "Where is she?" Rook barked, his gun trained on the man's center mass. "On the boat," the watcher said, his voice flat, devoid of accent. "Secured. They're leaving with the tide." "You're under arrest." "For what? Delivering a package? Dr. Crow will have explained everything to your superiors by now. You're the one who's wanted. I have you for kidnapping, for the murder of Rosemary Finch if that boat leaves." The watcher almost smiled. "I haven't killed anyone, detective. I procure and deliver, that's all. Miss Finch is alive, for now. But if you shoot me or arrest me, that boat will leave immediately, and she will become a weight at the bottom of the Sound. You need me to get her back." He was right, and he knew it. Rook was in a standoff with a man who held all the leverage. The engine of the Chris-craft coughed to life, a low grumble that vibrated through the wharf. "Call them back," Rook demanded. "I can't. The deal is closed. My part is done." Rook made a split-second decision. He couldn't let the boat leave. He shifted his aim from the watcher to the cruiser and fired twice. The shots were thunderous in the damp air. One round sparked off the cabin roof, the other shattered a porthole. Figures scrambled on deck. The watcher used the distraction. He didn't run. He lunged at Rook, a move of shocking speed and violence. He slapped the gun aside and drove a fist into Rook's bad leg. Rook cried out, collapsing to one knee. The watcher grabbed his gun hand, twisted. The revolver clattered to the wet gravel. A knee drove into Rook's chest, knocking the wind from him. He was on his back, the watcher standing over him, his own pistol now in hand, pointed at Rook's head. "Aesthetic sentiment is a luxury I don't share. You're a complication. Dr. Crow would prefer you discredited, but dead is also clean." He cocked the hammer. A voice, shrill with terror, screamed from the boat. "No!" It was Rosemary. She was on the deck, held by the thick-set captain, her face a pale oval in the darkness. The watcher's eyes flickered toward the Sound for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Rook needed. He scissored his good leg, sweeping the watcher's feet on from under him. The man fell hard, the gun discharging into the air. They grappled in the mud, a brutal, silent fight. The watcher was stronger, younger, trained, but Rook had the desperation of a man who'd survived Iwo Jima. He ignored the agony in his leg, driving a thumb into the watcher's eye. The man grunted, his grip loosening. Rook headbutted him, a sickening crunch of cartilage. He rolled free, scrambling for his own revolver. He found it, turned, and fired. The watcher was on one knee, raising his own weapon. Rook's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his gun, clutched the wound, but didn't cry out. He just stared at Rook with those cold, calculating eyes, then turned and ran, staggering into the maze of scrapyards and shadows. Rook let him go. He had a more pressing target. He turned his gun on the boat. "Shut off the engine. Let her go, or the next one goes through your skull." The captain, seeing his escort gone and a wild-eyed detective with a gun, made the smart choice. He killed the engine and pushed Rosemary toward the gangplank. She stumbled onto the wharf, sobbing, her clothes torn but alive. Rook kept the gun trained on the boat as Rosemary ran to him. "They have the suitcase, the plans," she choked out. "It doesn't matter," Rook said, pulling her behind him. "Get to my car. That way. Go." She hesitated, then ran into the night. Rook backed away from the wharf, his gun still on the captain. When he was far enough away, he turned and limped after Rosemary, expecting a bullet in his back at any moment. None came. The boat stayed dark, silent. The deal was ruined, but its players would live to fight another day.
He found Rosemary by his car, shivering violently. He pushed her into the passenger seat, got in, and drove away from the Duanamish, from the bridge, from the nightmare under the city. She was alive. He had saved the girl, but the Watcher was wounded, not caught. Crow was untouched, his web only slightly torn. The secrets were on a boat that would likely vanish before dawn. And he, Jonas Rook, was a wanted detective with a terrified witness and no proof of anything except that he'd broken 100 laws. He drove toward the only safe harbor he could think of, the crumbling, leaky sanctuary of his own apartment. The first gray light of dawn was bleeding into the eastern sky as he pulled into the alley behind his building. The night was over, but the fight, he knew, had just begun. He had the prize Crow wanted most, the living witness, and that made her and him the most hunted people in Seattle. Rook's desperate chase leads to a bloody showdown under the West Seattle Bridge. He wounds the Watcher and forces Rosemary's release from the boat, but the suitcase with the secrets gets away. Rosemary is alive but traumatized, a direct witness to Crow's conspiracy. Rook is now a fugitive detective with a priceless asset. They have won a battle but are far from safe. Crow's web is damaged, not destroyed, and the Watcher is still at large. With the police hunting him and Crow's resources vast, he must use Rosemary's testimony to bring down the spider from the outside while keeping her alive long enough to tell her story. The race is now for the courthouse through a gauntlet of corruption and cold-blooded professionals to see if an outlaw cop and a broken secretary can outrun the shadow of First Hill and bring the truth into the light. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The witness is the weapon.
Rook's apartment was a third-floor walk-up overlooking a fire escape in a grimy courtyard. It smelled of stale coffee, gun oil, and defeat. He locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and drew the blinds. Rosemary sat on his worn sofa, wrapped in a blanket, her hands shaking as she held a mug of hot tea he'd forced on her. She was in shock, but the resilient core that had drawn Crow's aesthetic interest was still there. Her eyes, once mousy and downcast, now held a sharp, haunted intelligence. "Start from the beginning," Rook said, his voice low. "No one can hear us here." She took a shuddering breath. "It started with Liam, my old boyfriend. When he got out, he was a mess. He owed money to bad people. They threatened him. Then Lucius Thorne came to me at work. He knew about my record. He said he could make Liam's debt disappear and make my record truly vanish, not just sealed. All I had to do was tell him about any unusual shipments. At first it was easy, just noting down crate numbers, destinations. Then it got more specific. He wanted copies of manifests for shipments to Northwest Aeronautical. I knew it was wrong, but I was so scared." "When did the government man approach you?" "Gray." "About a month ago. He knew everything. He said Thorne was a traitor selling secrets. He said I could help my country get a full pardon, a new identity. He said they'd protect Liam, so I agreed. I was to keep feeding Thorne what he wanted, but give copies to Gray. The meeting on the 17th, I was supposed to give Gray a microfilm cartridge had stolen from Thorne's briefcase when he visited Mr. Corbett. It had the final Yardam schematics." "What went wrong?" "I was scared. I thought I was being followed. Not by Gray's man, someone else. So I went to the meeting early. I went up to the 5th floor, to the dead drop spot Gray described. But someone was already there, a man. He had a typewriter. He was waiting. He smiled at me, said, 'You're early. The doctor will be pleased.' He grabbed me. I fought. I dropped my shoe, my bag. He put something over my mouth, sweet smell. Then nothing. The doctor. Crow." She nodded, tears streaming. "I woke up in that basement room. He'd talked to me, not threats, just questions, about what I felt when I betrayed Thorne, about fear, about morality. He was studying me. Then tonight, the other man, the Watcher, you called him, came and took me, said I was being moved to a permanent archive. He put me on that boat. The captain had the suitcase. They were going to take me out to sea." She broke down, sobbing. Rook let her cry. He had the story. It matched Gray's account and filled in the blanks. Crow, through his Watcher, had intercepted the exchange, capturing both the asset, Rosemary, and the prize, the microfilm, later developed into the documents in the suitcase. He'd used them to force Voss to complete his work, then brokered the sale. "The man with the typewriter," Rook pressed. "Did he say anything else, a name?" "No, but I heard the doctor call him once, over an intercom in the basement. He called him Mr. Kite."
Mr. Kite. A code name. The Watcher. Rook had enough to go to the feds. Gray's state-level intelligence was outmatched. This needed the FBI. But going to the feds meant walking into a police station, which would mean his immediate arrest on Crow's charges. He needed an intermediary, someone with credibility who would listen. He thought of Captain Jameson, his old commanding officer from his pre-war beat, now retired, a man of granite integrity. He lived in Ballard. If anyone would hear him out, it was Jameson. He gave Rosemary his revolver. If anyone but me comes through that door, you shoot. Understand? She nodded, her hands tightening on the grip. He took the bus to Ballard, keeping his head down. Jameson's house was a craftsman bungalow near the locks. The old captain answered the door in a cardigan, his eyes widening at the sight of his former detective, disheveled and desperate. "Janus, good God, man, the whole department is looking for you. They say you've lost your mind." "I need you to listen, Cap, for 10 minutes. Then you can call them if you want." Jameson, seeing the raw truth in Rook's eyes, let him in. Rook laid it out fast. Thorn, Gray, Crow, Kite, Yardam, the kidnapping, the boat. He presented it not as a theory, but as a sequence of facts, ending with Rosemary Finch hidden in his apartment. Jameson listened in stunned silence. When Rook finished, the old man poured 2 fingers of scotch, downed one, and handed the other to Rook. "This is bigger than the department, bigger than the state. You're talking about treason, kidnapping, corruption at the highest level. I need to get to the FBI, but if I walk in, Crow's friends will have me locked in a psych ward before I finish my sentence." Jameson thought for a long moment. "I have a friend, agent in charge, Warren McCauley, St. Lathia FBI. He's a hard case, but he's honest. He hates political interference. I can call him, get him to meet you on neutral ground, with the girl. You give your statement and hand her over into federal protective custody. That's your only play." It was a risk, but it was the only door left open. Jameson made the call, speaking in a low, urgent voice. He hung up. "He'll meet you. Gasworks Park, North Shore, Lake Union. 2 hours. He'll come alone. You bring the girl. He'll take your statements and assume custody." Gasworks Park, the derelict industrial site on the North Shore of Lake Union. Isolated, wide sight lines. A good place for a clandestine meet or an ambush.
Rook returned to his apartment. Rosemary was where he'd left her, the gun in her lap. "We're going to meet the FBI. They'll protect you. This ends today." They drove to Gas Works Park under a leaden midday sky. The rusted hulks of old gasification towers rose against the gray like prehistoric skeletons. The park was deserted in the drizzle. Rook parked near the water's edge. He saw a single figure in a trench coat standing by the lake, looking out at the gray water. Agent McCullough. He and Rosemary got out. As they walked across the wet grass, Rook's every instinct screamed. It was too quiet, too easy. They were 20 yards from McCullough when the agent turned. It wasn't the face of a seasoned G-man. It was younger, sharper, and his right arm was in a sling hidden beneath the coat. Mr. Kite, the Watcher. Rook shoved Rosemary behind him, reaching for his gun, but Kite was faster. His good hand came out of his pocket holding not a gun, but a small cylindrical object, a silenced pistol. The foot of the shot was barely louder than the rain. Rook felt a hammer blow to his chest. He stumbled back, the world tilting. He heard Rosemary scream. He tried to raise his own weapon, but his arms were leaden. He fell to his knees in the mud. Kite walked forward, his expression still that eerie calm. "The doctor doesn't like loose ends. The girl is a witness. You are a complication. The FBI agent is detained." This was a simpler solution. He aimed at Rook's head. A shot rang out, loud, unsilenced, not from Kite's gun. A red bloom appeared on Kite's shoulder, the same one Rook had shot earlier. He spun with a grunt of pain. From behind a rusted boiler, Captain Jameson stepped out, a smoking service revolver in his hand. The old man's face was a mask of fury. "Drop it, you bastard!" Kite didn't drop it. He fired twice at Jameson. The captain cried out, clutching his leg, but he returned fire, forcing Kite to take cover behind a concrete stanchion.
Rook, fighting the blackness creeping at the edges of his vision, raised his own gun. He fired at Kite's position, the shot going wide. The movement sent agony searing through his chest. He'd been shot. The bulletproof vest he'd worn? No, he wasn't wearing one. It was a through and through. He was bleeding out. Rosemary was on the ground beside him, sobbing. "Stay down," he gasped. The firefight was brief and brutal. Jameson, wounded, kept up a suppressing fire. Kite, hit twice now, was cornered. He made a break for the lake, limping, firing wildly behind him. Jameson's final shot caught him in the back. Kite staggered, fell face first into the shallow, icy water at the lake's edge, and didn't move. Silence descended, broken only by the rain and Jameson's ragged breathing. Rook's vision was narrowing to a tunnel. He saw Jameson hobble over to Kite, check for a pulse, then limp toward him. "Hang on, Jonas. Ambulance is coming," the old captain said, his voice tight with pain. Rosemary pressed her hands against Rook's chest, trying to stanch the flow of blood. "Don't you die. Don't you dare die." Rook looked at the gray Seattle sky, at the face of the girl he'd saved, at the old captain who'd saved them both. They had the Watcher. They had the witness. They had the truth. It would have to be enough. The spider was still in his web on First Hill, but his chief enforcer was dead in the mud. The game wasn't over, but the tide had turned. As darkness finally took him, Jonas allowed himself a single grim thought. We made him look, and it cost him. The safe harbor turns into a trap. The meeting with the FBI is an ambush by the wounded Watcher, Mr. Kite. Rook is shot, but Captain Jameson's backup saved them, killing Kite in a fierce firefight. The immediate threat is neutralized, but Rook is critically wounded, and the mastermind, Crow, remains untouched and protected. The witness is alive, the enforcer is dead, and a retired police captain now holds the evidence. The final move requires taking Rosemary's testimony and Kite's body to the real authorities, while Rook fights for his life. The spider has lost his stinger, but the web is still strong. To see if truth can survive the trip from the muddy shore of Lake Union to the halls of power, and what price the detective must pay for looking up, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. The reckoning is due.